The annual budget not only outlines prospective revenue and expenditure, but it also serves as a mechanism geared towards maintaining financial stability of a country and improving the scope of development by paving the path for progress and prosperity. Welcome to This Week in Parliament. I'm Joshua Hinkson. Thanks for joining us. On Tuesday, March 14th, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, Mayor Amor Motley, presented the second reading of the Appropriation Bill 2023, more commonly referred to as the budget speech. In this edition of This Week in Parliament, we take a look at the Prime Minister's presentation before the House of Assembly. Retired Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, political scientist Dr. George Belle, will analyze the Prime Minister's presentation. The Finance Minister begins with the budgeted figures for the fiscal year 2023-2024.
We'll be approving revenues just under $3.5 billion and expenditures of about $4.2 billion, with about $750 million in financing to come in the next year. I believe, sir, our focus on generating growth will help us also. And I've spoken to you about how we will treat to the financing through the domestic capital markets, the continued engagement of the international financial institutions to be able to ensure that we can seamlessly bridge this financing gap. This budget is about national transformation, about building a global society and a world-class people by 2030. This budget ought to be called Upward, Onward, Bajan Excellence 2030.
Okay, the budget was presented in Parliament by the Prime Minister. My summary comment would be that it demonstrated overwhelming vision on her part and an outlay of detailed developmental ideas and prospects. And this is unusual for emphasis in budgets in terms of the traditional presentation of a budget.
This year, sir, although Mr. Speaker, it will have some elements of the traditional budget, I want to take the opportunity as Prime Minister and leader of government to have a conversation with the nation, with the people of this country. And at the end of the conversation, I want us to agree on what I have come to call mission transformation, to agree on the work necessary to ensure that when others look back, they can say, mission transformation, mission accomplished.
The presentation normally revolves around a lot of technical information and managerial adjustments in relation to financial policies that are required for the economy over a period of a year following the estimates. And in this way, she, in terms of the style of her presentation and the emphasis in her presentation, she made a qualitative departure, which would lead me to conclude that this is the basis on which she could stress vision and also stress developmental ideas and prospects. It was therefore significant when Ms. Motley, in the early stages of her presentation, declared that there will be no new taxes.
Today, sir, is about discussing where we are taking the nation and what is needed from each and every one of us. In fact, let me indicate now that I'm not only adding no new taxes in an attempt to ensure that the government collects outstanding monies and cognizant of the challenge faced by the individuals and businesses during this rough period of COVID and other challenges, the government from this outset is prepared to recognize and offer on the table that the principal owed at the Barbados Water Authority and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for bills owed by citizens of this nation and companies of this nation will be reduced by 25% so long as people pay between the 15th of March tomorrow and the 15th of September of this year.
The Prime Minister's response, consequently, seriously shattered the credibility and the judgment of the opposition voices in terms of their strategic emphasis in the critique of the coming budget presentation. Because they had to make a choice as to how would you, if you're going to make comments before you actually see the budget, then probably you're extrapolating from information coming out of the estimates. I think that is partly what they did. And then on the basis of that, saying that there was certain degree of deficit that had to be financed. And if you were to do that, then this either meant increased taxation or debt in terms of borrowing, and also the possibility then of layoffs. So I think that was the base, if there was going to be any base, because the presentation hadn't been made, that would be the base of it, of their emphasis. But with the Prime Minister immediately more or less countering on that level in early stages of the budget and then in the content of the budget presentation, it, in my view, seriously undermined what you would assess as the judgment of the leadership of that pre-budget presentation critique. Why did you make those kinds of choices in terms of influencing the politics, the mindset of people? And they did stir up a fair amount of concern. So you could say that the pre-budget commentary and the emphasis by the opposition voices did succeed in creating a bit of concern among the population.
One of the topical issues debated prior to the budget speech, no doubt, has been the likelihood of major redundancies throughout the public sector, specifically in state-owned enterprises. Some SOEs are to undergo reform and restructuring, and the Prime Minister has since informed Barbados that the process is at a delicate stage.
Later on in the presentation, that in relation to the state-owned enterprises, where people would felt that that is where the layoffs might come, that if there were any movements there, that these people would be siphoned off and taken care of in terms of giving them alternative places for occupation or training. But then she did not declare any detailed adjustments in the state-owned enterprises. What she did stress is that there were grave financial losses, and therefore clearly there was going to be attention paid to these at some time.
As it relates to job cuts, there's no massive set of layoffs coming in the public service, but there will be adjustments in the SOE sector, which we've already started to discuss with the public since 2019, and which my predecessor, the Honorable Chris Sinclair, would have adverted to since 2010, 13 years ago. Wherever, and I will talk to you later about that wherever those happen, there will be adjustments to accommodate those persons in almost every possible way as far as we can.
Ms. Motley herself identified that there were great losses in the area of the state-owned enterprises. So that it's not surprising that people are asking for an examination in more detail of these state-owned enterprises, and that they're going to have to be addressed. I think to some extent they're already being addressed in some cases. I
told you at the beginning, sir, that this would be a major plank of the government's work on reform. We've been talking about this since 2010. SOEs were really created for the purpose of more efficient and effective delivery of critical, important public services. Instead, they have grown to now represent the opposite of what we expected. And this is not just Barbados. from Jamaica and Bahamas, right back down to Guyana and Suriname, from Barbados to Belize. The example of SOEs in the post-independence era has been, regrettably, not the shining example that it was intended to be. Delivering clean water to every household, getting Bajans around this country in a timely and safe manner, ensuring that every Bajan receives the health services and the garbage is collected routinely, are all dependent on us getting these SOEs right. I've said enough to let you know that we are not going to be a hostage to fortune and that we will embrace our future, but we will do right by our people. This is the government that gave 2 wage increases in 10 years. This is the government that increased allowances. This is the government that put a minimum wage in place. To the 2 and 5, sorry, they gave 1 and 10. This is the government that continues to see people first. But if your toe is sore and you're diabetic, you can't keep it because you run this, losing the whole foot. And if you lose the foot, you don't do it then, you might lose the leg or you might get sepsis. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions, but in every instance, we are going to find ways to cushion people and to make sure that in most instances, their packages are appropriate and the opportunities for re-engagement are possible where we can find that.
In reforming the state-owned enterprises, the veteran political scientist holds the view that in spite of their financial standing, their impact on the development of society should not be disregarded.
So that in this context, in terms of what I am saying, I would really want to raise some caution about how you treat some of the state-owned enterprises. We have to be very careful in the context of the neoliberal philosophy that, while it is being reversed in some areas, is still dominant in informing policy across the globe, that the neoliberal pressures from creditors and advisors do not undermine the social contributions and the contributions to development of some of these state-owned enterprises. And therefore, a real judgment call is going to have to be made in relation to not undermining them. In the same way that we dealt with questions of, let's say, something like tertiary education, that a big argument had to go on over tertiary education as to whether tertiary education should be seen as a cost or an investment. That you can't just say that it's going to cost the society so much, because to what extent is the investment in young people or the investment in people being qualified or educated, in the investment in a knowledge pool being created by such institutions being present in your society, to what extent these contribute to development that you can't even see at the time when the investment is being made. And therefore to go and undermine them can be very problematic. At the last council meeting at Cave Hill, we've been seeing hard evidence being provided that the more senior students who withdrew when they were required to finance the education at the tertiary level, they withdrew from tertiary education, that the university up to now has not recovered that particular demographic. Some of the younger students came back in, but a lot of those people who were trying to qualify themselves as mature students, they have now been pushed in a situation that they think that it is probably too much to risk going there again. And the university is now providing hard evidence that they are not present anymore. And it is a gap in the recruitment of students for the university. This is a social cost. And we don't know the full implications of that as yet, but we know that it is a social cost. And it is in this way that if you do not proceed cautiously with the interventions on the SOE because of neoliberal philosophies, you could do damage to something that is making a social contribution that is developmental in implication. Health. is something that you have to be very careful of. We know that it's extremely expensive. But if we go the wrong way, that you're also potentially destroying the health level of your society. And that has serious developmental consequences. So we can't just treat the hospital as that it's not making a profit. We have to see that there's a social contribution that it makes that is critically developmental. Likewise, something like the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, which people like to hit out at all the time. If you look at what has happened in the last couple of years at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, the programs have been significantly, including television or outstandingly television, critically restructured to represent national images and national activity in relation to the Barbadian people. I cannot see how you could conclude in looking at that institution, it having reformed and made such an outstanding effort to achieve that end, that is not something that has social consequences and is developmental. Therefore, we should see now that the CBC is something that is very important in relation to our social development. Once we can maintain that kind of emphasis in its activity, in its work, in its products, in its emphases and so on, if that is so, then this is something that is worth investing in, and it is not just to be related to in terms of market forces. We have to see that the society has to see it as an investment in itself, just as in education, just as in health. And that is one of the state-owned enterprises, and it has losses. If you keep it at the level of saying, is it making a profit, and so on. So I'm saying that, well, we cannot, in budgeting, identify that these areas are not areas that have to be looked at. We have to be very cautious in what would be suggested is the way to reform them, or the way to get around the losses, that we must not do then damage to our social development and investment in the future development of the country and the society and its people by engaging in the wrong kind of reform. Well, I know that on the basis of saying that the SOEs are responsible for a lot of leakage in terms of losses, that you're going to have to address some of them. What I was seeking to do was to pick out those SOEs that I think have a social role that is important to the development process. And that if we, in our anxiety to reform them, do damage to the point that it undermines development, that would be the wrong kind of intervention. But there are a range of other SOEs. Sometimes there's so many areas that we can't even remember that the leakages are taking place too. And some of them are areas where the neoliberal philosophy can be very applicable. In other words, they can be handed over to the private sector. Now, I think that the effort has to be made to see where those SOEs exist. They might be not as large as some of the others, but where they, in terms of losses, you might be surprised. But you look for those, you make the effort to look for those because you want to save the others. In that way, I think you'll be making a much better contribution to development planning. So that you make the effort to seek out those SOEs which would not damage your developmental efforts to the extent of the ones that I identified, and see if they can sufficiently reduce the losses that would be required for an adjustment to bring positive impact on the economy. I think that's how I would approach it. Because sometimes they create SOEs today, another one tomorrow, and you then have to do the search. So I suppose I could get a list and go through it. But what I did was to pick out the ones that are outstanding. This would be water, health, and public information, the CBC, you know. Those are some of them that are identified as having the biggest, having big losses. I'm not sure if they are the biggest, but having big losses. And and trying to see whether, because of their social strategic position in relation to development concerns, you do not go and interfere with them to the extent that you undermine another aspect of society that is very important in relation to development.
Now, Dr. Belle speaks of the prospects for Barbados' development and economic growth, given the current level of foreign reserves and the commencement of several investment projects in the coming financial year, as listed by the Finance Minister.
We can list some of the things that she picked out. We don't have to go into all the details because people hearing my statement here would have heard the budget presentation. But if you have a recovery of conditions on the foreign reserve since 2018 that are significantly improved and provide a significantly improved platform for development, then that is a basis for possible good development and transformation. And Ms. Motley was able to demonstrate that we are going to reach a level in our reserves that is not matched historically. In something like over 3.3 billion, in reserves, which is she identified as a record. Projections on developments in the city and Bay Street, Bridgetown, which has become very rundown, and which would almost in many ways be seen as a dying city. The prospects for reinvigorating the city and reinvigorating that line of activities going from Bay Street, or from the Pierhead up Bay Street. This has to be seen as something that is going to be developmental for Barbados in relation to what it could do for the city. There are a number of institutional innovations that she mentioned to target development. National Growth Council, National Strategic Council, a new industrial park, cybersecurity training, digital economy training, new national quality policy, and so on. These are all very strongly developmental.
I want to say something now, because there will be a lot of investment, and I'm going to talk to a few of them now. But I think it is important that we repeat that, look, investment is going to be critical to growth. Investment is critical to growth. We're not going to grow or ease the burden on people without investment. Government investment, local private sector investment, foreign private sector investment. Investment vehicles for the small people and not just the large people. But investment must equally be respectful of our people, our national spaces, and our traditions. This administration has made it clear that growth is essential. Leading the way, you will soon see projects. I know business, but them hear about that since the last administration. Well, the minister who is now taking responsibility for planning, the Honorable Senior Minister, member for Christchurch West, assures me that after the meetings that he will have in the next few days, that we will have some clarity on the start, but he expects it to happen within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Star, I hold you to it. But he looked back at me and tell me, when you hold me to that, remember a gear start with Hotel Indigo in my constituency of Hastings? I said, you got me. And he is correct, because that has now come out of the ground, and even though we did the groundbreaking about 6 months ago, you see Hotel Indigo coming up. Similarly, the member for St. Peter is aware that we are in conversation with his constituents too, because the Pendry Hotel will take the place of the old Nikki Beach property and will include Port Ferdinand, and that will therefore require a slight realignment of the road, but all of the accesses to the beaches and to everything else is being protected. Is this the first realignment of a road in that parish? No, Mr. Speaker. The then Prime Minister, Owen Arthur, had a realignment of the roundabout at the top of Speightstown with BTII, Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. And the last government, without talking to us, had a realignment and built a bridge to the same, by the same Port Ferdinand, by the same Nikki Beach, and all we are doing now is making sure that we align that road properly so that we can get the best possible investment. Mr. Speaker, we will also be meeting with Pierhead Project next week, Friday, I believe. No, this Friday. This Friday. And that is an investment being done for the front of all of Bridgetown here on the Corinage, and there will be implications for where the boats can dock, and there will be construction on that one part of Bay Street for the better part of the next 18 months to 2 years. It is going to mean traffic will be difficult in Bridgetown, and the Deputy Prime Minister knows, and her ministry will come up with an appropriate traffic plan and public education plan, because truly when you have those buildings out, and BTII has accepted, I believe, a proposal for the Treasury building, that will also be undertaken in the very near future. By the end of this year. It means that the next 2 years in the heart of Bridgetown will be a difficult place to navigate, and we hope that some kind of alternative arrangements will be put in place. Mr. Speaker, I have chosen to just refer to a few. We are going to see the relocation of the Civic Center in St. James, which is now on the beach, in there by Frederick Smith Secondary School, to allow us to be able to create more jobs for our people in the north, especially by ensuring another hotel can go on that site, and that will also lead as well to a top-class 6-star brand being added to the country. We will hear more about that in the very near future. Similarly, I have now had confirmation that the Royalton Hotel, which is on the previous Discovery Bay site, is expected to start by the 3rd quarter of this year, having settled its financial arrangements. Mr. Speaker, I assure you, I am not telling you about the projects that are not yet ready to start and that the senior minister has given me. I've tried to just focus on a few. And in addition to this, last year I would have told you about Marriott's undertaking, the Marriott Group, which is now the largest owner of hotel rooms in this country, undertaking a $150 million refurbishment. For reasons they had to push it back to this year. I met with the administration of Marriott, both in Washington and in Barbados, and the Minister of Tourism assures me that they will shortly be starting later this year to upgrade these properties. I've seen the plans, I'm happy, and it will bring a significant upgrade to the quality of their properties in this country. Sir, the truth is, this increased activity is all good. And we have new legislation from the Planning and Development that the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central helped shepherd, and the Honourable Member for Christchurch West is working. It may need some tweaking. The change management contracts are now being issued. But as I said, this now requires dedicated daily attention. And I am never too big to say that, come star, help me lift some more weight. Hence, Senior Minister Duguid, the member for Christchurch West, being asked to take full responsibility for the planning portfolio in Cabinet from tomorrow. Sir, successful development, therefore, is the art of balancing competing interests. including access to land for various uses by multiple stakeholders. Such competing pressures include the need to keep land in agricultural production. We know the debate all too well. Or should we use it for housing, industrial, commercial, or even recreational development sometimes? Coupled with that is the balance between development and the surrounding residents and the public in general, in terms of beach access, the shadowing and blocking of views with large expansive developments, the impact on water and sewage use, and not to mention the traffic impact and the increased road utilization. These and other factors, sir, must be balanced with the other side of the coin, such as investment and job opportunities and positive downstream benefits that these investments will bring to the community as a whole. Money in people's pockets, let me get real. These conversations must happen. They are healthy conversations, and we cannot predetermine each time on which side of the coin it will land. But we must have the conversations, and respect must be had on all sides. As a government, let me say this, we are committed to preserving the rights of all citizens in this country. And you don't have to ask. Let me make it clear. We've said from long time, there will be no private beaches in this country. Barbados must have access to the beach for all. Indeed, one of the conditions for the construction of the new Hyatt Ziva in Bay Street is a reconstruction of a facility, not just beach access, but a proper facility at the old Bridgetown Fish Market. For those, I was about to say next to Gasbros, but then I remember the people who don't know that don't know Gasbros neither. So the gray hair showing in my little words. But just literally below the Roman Catholic Cathedral, that open space there, that one of the conditions is the Hyatt Ziva. One, must build a facility there, and two, must contribute $2 million into a fund for urban transformation by the time the hotel opens, to be able to make sure that the people in the Orleans and the people in Chapman Lane and the people in Dando Lane and the people in Bay Street will have access to a low interest. And when I say low interest, I mean 2% or lower, Skipper, in order to be able to upgrade their housing stock in the city. Because when we upgraded Golden Square, when we upgraded Cheapside with the markets, and we're still continuing to finish now the Butcher's Market, and we're now going to upgrade what, if you ever walk down there, the people call Georgetown and Kingstown. Outside between Cheapside and River Bus Stand, we're upgrading there and also fixing the things that need to be fixed in the River Bus Stand, including the drainage problems that continue to bedevil the persons down there. Mr. Speaker, you cannot invite investment into the center of your town and leave your people lacking for it. And as to the taxi men who want somewhere to go, I heard you 2 Sunday nights ago where you stopped me at the top of Nelson Street and Fairchild Street. There will be, I go all over. There will be a provisioning for parking for you. The Deputy Prime Minister and her officials will meet with you. Clearly, space is limited on that road, but we believe we can find an accommodation for you so that you can ply your trade in good order, in the same way that she found a solution for you with the increase of taxi rates after more than 20 years. In addition to unlocking growth, sir, we have the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation undertaking an industrial park construction, the first one in a long time, of $30 million at Newton in Christchurch. And I have asked the Senior Minister for Infrastructure to meet with the Member of Parliament for St. Lucie, because it is about time St. Lucie has, again, jobs in manufacturing through a light industrial park, and that must be the second area for the construction of industrial activity. Sir, it may mean that the Bridgetown Port and others will have to work with the Arawak Cement Plant on the jetty that is down there to see how best we can strengthen that jetty as we go forward in order to be able to ensure that things can come into St. Lucie and not just the Bridgetown Harbour. We have been putting aside money for the redevelopment of Queen's Park, and that project will start under the management of the Barbados Tourism Investment, Inc., and we expect to finish it fully by the end of 2024. Queen's Park must be, and the people of Barbados will give it its new name, not me. Queen's Park will be this country's hub of creativity, with facilities for production, rehearsal, vending, and live and digital performance. It will have a small amphitheater so that people can stand in the same place as Marcus Messiah Garvey and speak on a Saturday or a Sunday or whenever they please. Mr. Speaker, it must be the home of creativity and advocacy in this country, and it must also provide accommodation for artists in residence so that there is a synergistic opportunity to determine what is possible in this Caribbean civilization, because when artists determine the possibilities, governments can then execute what is probable and certain.
During her presentation, Prime Minister Maudsley highlighted focal points in the recovery and building of Barbados' economy. Ms. Maudsley also addressed the reduction in national debt and announced the payment of monies to holders of Series B bonds.
Over the last 4.5 years, we have made significant strides in reducing our debt levels. That's what we came to do. The end of 2018, domestic debt was restructured. There was some pain for all, but we promised we would minimize it when we can. 2019 December, external debt was restructured. Indeed, sir, our debt went from 176.8% of GDP at the start of the BERT program in May, June of 2018 to 120.6% where it is today. We went back up during COVID, and we've come right back down to 120.6% today. Mr. Speaker, we are also now paying 30 cents in the dollar in loan repayment. I remember when the former Prime Minister Owen Arthur stood in this chamber and gave a speech in the budget speech and told the country that we could not sustain debt service of 68 cents in the dollar. We are down, sir, to 30 cents, as I said. I assure us that we are in a stronger fiscal position, and what is more important, our productive sectors are performing better than before and are able to support now our repayment plans. We cannot, however, sir, we cannot become complacent. It is imperative that we continue on this path and further reduce our debt to secure our long-term sustainability. And to achieve this, we will continue to prioritize prudent financial management, improved revenue collection, and to streamline our expenditure. We will also continue to explore innovative financing mechanisms that help us reduce our debt burden, while also providing us with the necessary resources to invest in critical areas such as infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Consistent with what we did at the beginning of the debt restructuring, will now make a partial principal prepayment of $74.8 million to be made no later than the 30th of April this year, next month, to 5,407 individual bondholders of Series B bonds who are on the register as of 31st of March this year, and who will now each receive a payment of $17,500 each. Mr. Speaker, we took no pride in having to give those persons Series B bonds when we inherited the difficult moment that caused us to go in debt restructuring. But we said then, even as we prepared some of the pensioners in 2018 and 19, that we will do right by you. And today we stand now, sir. Of that 5,407 persons, 2,627 of them are being repaid absolutely in full. is what good stewardship of the people's money is. You make promises, you ask people to carry a burden, you remember them, you come back to them, and you do right by them. And I know that next week, when people start to get the $1,500 in the pocket, you understand what I just tell you? $1,500 equates to 6% for the people at the bottom of the public service. How many people at the top? The people at the top get tax allowances, and they don't want to tell you that, but I can tell you that them get a lot of money back. Every permanent secretary, every minister, all of them get tax credits back and get that space back. So they can afford to have the equivalent of $1,500 at the top, because the people at the bottom must get a disproportionate share of their income with the $1,500. But I ain't done there. I ain't done there. Mr. Speaker, that $1,500 ain't only going to the people who work in the public service, but there were people who came in as ash workers at the Ministry of Public Works and at the People National Housing Corporation and in all those jobs during COVID. And the $1,500 represents our thank you. I wish I could do more. I feel you feel it, just like me. I wish I could do more. But I know that I'm doing right, both with the prepayment of this debt and using the surplus that we have beyond our targets this year to do, one, reduce our debt, two, to be able to boost industrial productivity by showing our workers that we care about them, three, to be able to put something one side next week for capital formation for the projects that we have to build out to make sure that those workers who are now going home can find jobs at places like the geriatric hospital that the senior minister, Minister of Health, broke ground yesterday for me in the Botanical Gardens for yesterday. 104 million, I think it is, over the next 18 to 20 months. And other capital projects that we will vote for next week out of this year's estimates and not next year's, so that we are financing part of the robust capital program for that. So, as I said, reducing debt, two, doing right by our workers, three, capital formation, four, the state-owned enterprise reform that we have to finish, that I need something to be able to help stabilize as we work with the workers to make sure that the adjustment is not hard. And five, finally, economic competitiveness.
This is the emphasis in the presentation. The list goes on, much more than this. So we know, because people, you would have listened to the presentation, that she went on in at great distance and stress in the areas in which you could identify investment in development processes. So I'm not going to make that case over again, because you can go and read it, and there's a reference basis for understanding whether this is so or not. So in such a context, you would have to ask that a critique that targets a lack of development issues in the budget is questionable. So from whence cometh that critique?
Let's turn our attention now to Prime Minister Motley's summary of the budgetary measures for the period April 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. This will be followed by Dr. Belle's general thoughts of the budget speech.
One, the reduction in the principal owed to the Barbados Water Authority and the QEH by 25%, conditioned on the full payment of outstanding debts between March 15th, tomorrow, and September 15th. Get in fast and get your 25% reduction if you pay off all. Two, effective April 1st, I indicated that we would be reintroducing a cap on gasoline with the VAT dollar amount of VAT payable on gasoline to be capped at 47 cents per litre for another 6 months. Similarly, effective 1st April 2023, we will reinstate the dollar amount of VAT payable on diesel to be capped at 37 cents per litre for 6 months. Gasoline, 47 cents per litre for 6 months. Diesel, 37 cents per litre for 6 months. 4, we will be introducing transfer pricing legislation in the coming financial year. 5, the establishment of a unit trust corporation to mobilize private savings. 6, the introduction of a dedicated incentive regime for film production, and I now give the details. 1, 25% transferable tax credit on eligible expenses directly related to the pre-production, production, and post-production of their films, which include all local costs and foreign cast and crew if paid via a Barbadian production company. 2, suppliers such as studio and film equipment rentals that are registered as exclusive film providers are exempt from value-added tax. 3, eligible expenses include both above-the-line and below-the-line expenses, with the exception of distribution and marketing costs, finance costs and bank charges, and completion bond and foreign insurance policies. It should be completion bonds and foreign insurance policies. Payments to foreign cast and crew, if made via a Barbadian company, are subject to only 1% withholding tax. 4, the requirements are: A, single shooting permit issued by the film commissioner. B, minimum spend in country of $500,000 US. C, a signed production services agreement with a local production services company. D, contracting legal, accounting, and auditing services from pre-approved firms in Barbados. E, a local general liability insurance policy. And F, at least 15% of the total crew and cast members must be Barbadian nationals or residents. Mr. Speaker, let me signal now that as soon as we build capacity through increased training, and I've asked the Barbados Community College to start that as well with the NCF, that number of 15% will increase to 25%. But it will start at 15% until we're satisfied we reach there. Number 7, the establishment of a $2 million revolving fund at the BAS, Barbados Agricultural Society, to provide small loans to assist livestock farmers to engage in sustainable farming practices. 8, the reduction of the air travel and tourism development fee for CARICOM travel by 47% from $37.50 to $20, effective July 1st, 2023 until December 14, 2023, cost of which is $2.2 million. 9, the provision of $5 million to the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. before the end of fiscal year 2022-23, in other words, from the surplus next week, to supplement the resuscitation of air travel, especially in the summer months of 2023 and 2024. This will be in addition to funds that they are holding already. 10, new 2022 customs tariff to be laid in Parliament and to take effect from the 1st of April 2023. 11, customs to initiate re-registration of warehouse and duty-free shopping sector on a rolling 3-year cycle. 12, customs to conduct field audits of the warehouse and duty-free shopping sector. 13, customs to conduct audits in collaboration with delegated authorities of the exemption regime to reduce tax expenditures by a minimum of 20% of $150 million over the next 2 fiscal years. In the first instance, $30 million, 4%, during 2023 to 2024. 14, effective April 1st, 2023, all receiving concessions will be required to participate in the business surveys from the Barbados Statistical Service, the Ministry of Labor, and the Central Bank of Barbados to better measure all economic activity in the interests of this country. 15, the introduction of omnibus financial guarantee for warehouse and duty-free shop operators to protect duty liability, which will lower the cost of doing business upon successful re-registration. 16, the establishment of a $3 million low-interest revolving fund at Fund Access for the acquisition of or conversion to electric, plug-in hybrid, CNG, or solar-powered passenger vehicles for the public service vehicle sector. 17, the effective April 1st, 2023, introduction of a $25,000 loan limit for postal workers to acquire electric motorbikes. 18, extension of the excise tax and VAT holiday on the purchase of electric vehicles in Barbados by ordinary persons by an additional 2 years, or companies by an additional 2 years until March 31st, 2016. 19, the introduction and the inclusion, of nurses in the schedule of public officers, loan and travel allowances from the 1st of April 2023 for all nurses. 20, Ministries of Labour and People Empowerment to unlock the employment opportunities for persons with disabilities under the First Jobs Initiative. 21, government to provide $20 million in capitalization of the Blue-Green Bank in collaboration with the Green Climate Fund and USAID once approved by the middle of this year. 22, effective April 1st, 2023, the diversion of 50% of unclaimed and undistributed assets from the Consolidated Fund and sheet funds from the Central Bank of Barbados into the Barbados Environmental and Sustainability Fund to support marine conservation efforts. 23, government to initiate a partial principal payment of $74.8 million to be made no later than the 30th of April 2023 to those eligible 5,407 individual bondholders of Series B bonds on the register as of March 31st, 2023, who would receive, and each will receive, a principal payment of $17,500, ensuring that 2,627 people are repaid in full. 24, government will restart capital market operations with the introduction of new instruments such as reverse auctions and a bonds-on-demand facility at commercial banks authorized to sell securities to the public. 25, for income year 2023, the personal income tax allowance for pensioners is increased from $40,000 to $45,000. 26, government establishes a working committee to implement reverse mortgages by January 1st, 2024. 27, the establishment of the National Strategic Council, the Growth Council, and I should have mentioned the Fiscal Council, which will be chaired by Mr. Alejandro Werner, who is a member, a former distinguished finance official from the government of Mexico, and who would have previously headed up the Western Hemisphere at the International Monetary Fund. And we have already had agreement from Professor Winston Moore and also Mr. Cedric Merle, Ms. Donna Wellington, and there are 2 more people that will be added to that in the Fiscal Council. And even though we have the IMF monitoring us, we want to develop the habit of the Fiscal Council monitoring us so that we have that habit by the time we go back to the international capital markets within 2 years. The National Strategic Council, therefore, the Fiscal Council, the National Growth Council, all to improve governance, accountability with respect to fiscal affairs and to ensure sustainable and inclusive growth. The Growth Council will equally be represented with Labour and private sector persons on it. 28, government to issue an RFP to enter into public-private partnership arrangement for 3 government buildings, including government headquarters expansion and other buildings at Warrens to reduce the $70 million annual rental bill. 29, introduction of a management trainee initiative for the public service. 30, establishment of a working committee in the social partnership subcommittee to implement the 24-hour economy by the end of this fiscal year. 31, I am adding the provision of $9.6 million next week in the budget, the excess that we have, to provide the creation of 17 mini-stadia across Barbados. We spoke about this earlier. We said if we have the money, we will eventually come to it. The money is now there. We will make sure that we have these 17 mini-stadia all across every parish of this country. 33, the creation of posts of life coaches, parental coaches, and a program to support psychological counseling across 10 communities, the most 10 challenging communities in the first instance. Budget of $2.5 million will be allocated for this measure. 34, the establishment of a $2 million fund at the BIDC Export Barbados to support the fashion industry. 35, a provision of $600,000 annually to support the introduction of a national strings program in every one of the 68 public primary schools in this country. Sir, it is for all Bajans, all, to assure our young people, in particular, that it is possible for them to have a bright future in Barbados and not just on this planet. And who will it involve? It will be a national exercise involving every man, woman, and child who wants to step up to the plate. Every person, every Bajan, and indeed all those who love Barbados. And why, sir, are we doing it? Mr. Speaker, simply to secure the stability of our people, to empower and enfranchise those who have not been able to make the train and get on that train to success, to access wealth or to create intergenerational wealth. I really should say to access money and to create wealth which is intergenerational, to ensure redress and balancing out of the economic scales because of the history that we've had, not to exclude, sir, anyone, but to include all of us. We are doing it to ensure that Barbados is capable of existing and succeeding in a world in which we find ourselves. One that we don't make, but one in which our people and all micronation states must navigate, no matter how hostile as we have seen in the last few years. And sir, how will we do it? One day at a time, one person at a time, united for a common cause and committed to turning mission transformation to mission accomplished.
We have to really ask ourselves whether this is not a more realistic way of presenting a budget, especially if the budget then is oriented towards development. Because development doesn't happen over a year and so on. It is a process. And therefore, there is a certain length of time that has to be taken. And particularly so where there are going to be factors that you have no control over, that you have to respond to as you are maintaining this process. In the parliamentary debate, the member for St. Michael's South made an important distinction in relation to what was represented in the contribution by the Prime Minister in her presentation. He said that what she had done brought out the distinction between leadership and management. And he emphasized, and correctly so in my view, that leadership is not management. That leadership and management are two distinct things. And he emphasized then that in undisputably uncertain times, that what is required is good leadership. And there's a need for good leadership. The need for good leadership is paramount in uncertain times. And this is what the Prime Minister was providing. And this is why, therefore, I have given to her presentation positives in respect to that.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. There you have it, a synopsis of this week in Parliament, where we focused on the budgetary proposals as presented by Prime Minister Maudsley, with analysis of the presentation by political scientist Dr. George Bell. With your extended edition of This Week in Parliament, I'm Joshua Hinkson. Thanks for your time.